I'm Luna, 29, and the day I buried my grandfather was supposed to be about honoring his memory. Instead, it turned into the most humiliating day of my life. In a room where everyone else walked out with checks thick enough to tilt their wrists, I walked out with a single white envelope and a one-way plane ticket to Buena Park. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. My uncle smiled like he'd won a game he never deserved to play. And I told myself I wouldn't cry. Not there. Not in front of them. But humiliation is a kind of heat. It finds the weakest parts and melts them. By the time I reached the street, I was already burning. That's how my revenge began, with a boarding pass and a promise. The morning of the funeral smelled like old lilies and rainy wool. I watched water bead on the black umbrellas as a dozen luxury cars idled along the curb. My grandfather, Arthur Whitlow, was the kind of man who handed out jobs like umbrellas in a storm, quietly, competently, without asking for thanks. He built Whitlow Maritime from a single tugboat into a fleet that helped port cities breathe. He taught me to tie a bowline and to balance a ledger. He also taught me that names on paper can be sacred and dangerous. Inside the chapel's dim back room, our lawyer Ms. Hart aligned 3 thick folders on a walnut table. My Uncle Victor swaggered in first, cufflinks flashing. My cousin Madeline took her place beside him, her perfume a cloud of gardenias. My mother Evelyn came last, avoiding my gaze. Ms. Hart cleared her throat. "We'll keep this brief, given the day." Brief. The word landed like a shovel of dirt. She opened the first folder and read off bequests. Victor, majority share of Whitlow Maritime's domestic operations. Madeline, a trust stocked with enough dividend payments to sail the Riviera forever. Evelyn, the family house, the paintings, the pension my grandfather built for her after she left the company. Then Ms. Hart slid a slim envelope across the table toward me. A sliver of white that felt absurd next to the thick stacks going to everyone else. "For you, Luna," she said. Per Mr. Whitlow's express instructions. Inside, a one-way plane ticket to Buena Park, leaving in 48 hours. No cash, no shares. A note in my grandfather's tidy block letters. "Go where the truth is." A silence scattered like broken glass. Victor broke it with a chuckle. "Charming. Arthur's last joke." Madeline smiled, sympathetic and poisonous. My mother shifted her purse, face neutral, voice small. "Maybe he wanted you to travel." I stared at the ticket. "Go where the truth is." My throat closed. My hands shook. I stood up. If he wanted to cut me out, he could have done it without theater. My voice didn't sound like mine. Victor leaned back. "Face it, Luna, he never meant for you to be involved." He gestured broadly. "You're an artist. This is business." He said artist like it meant useless. And maybe I am. I write, I tell stories. I keep notebooks full of people's hidden reasons. But my grandfather used to call me his truth keeper. He used to say I saw around corners. I looked at Ms. Hart, and for a second her eyes softened. Then the mask slid back. "These are Mr. Whitlow's final wishes." I walked out before I shattered. 2 days later, I was in Buena Park, trying not to feel like a character in someone else's expensive joke. The air was bright with salt and money. Yachts lined Port Hercules like silver commas in a sentence about power. Ferraris purred past gelato shops. My suitcase had exactly 3 dresses and 4 paperbacks. There was a hotel room with a view of water I couldn't afford, and an itinerary that was empty. That night, I pressed the note from my grandfather beneath my pillow like a relic and slept badly. He'd once told me, when people want to hide a wrong, they bury it under something loud. Buena Park was loud. Maybe that was the point. On the second morning, I found another envelope slipped under my door, unmarked. Inside, a single brass key and a card embossed with an address near the marina, Rue Princesse Charlotte, 12. The handwriting was not my grandfather's. In ballpoint scrawl, 2 words, "Ask Oliver," my pulse sped. This was no joke. It was a trail. I followed the card to a small workshop wedged between a couture boutique and a florist. Oliver Shaw, as the sign declared, specialized in vintage engines and discreet services. The shop smelled like oil and good secrets. A man in his 40s emerged, wiping his hands. "You must be Luna." He had the steady eyes of someone who could take apart the world and put it back together better. "Who told you I was coming?" I asked. "Arthur," Oliver said simply. He planned for the chance. He held up the brass key between 2 fingers. "That fits a locker at the port. He told me if the wrong people got everything, he'd send the right person for what mattered. My breath stumbled. What matters? Oliver's smile was brief. A ledger. He led me along the dock to a row of lockers. The brass key slid into number 73 with a satisfying click. Inside, a flat parcel wrapped in waterproof canvas. Oliver motioned for me to open it. I pulled back the canvas to reveal a hardbound ledger, old, edges dimpled with use. On the first page, my grandfather's handwriting danced in neat columns, dates and amounts, port fees, vessel numbers. The second page was the same. But in the middle, a thin sheaf of newer pages had been spliced in. Different paper, paler ink, different hand. The numbers didn't add up. They never add up, not when someone's lining pockets. There were notes in pencil. V assures discretion. M pushes timeline. V and M Victor and Madeline? My stomach turned. Oliver tapped a margin. Notice the entries tied to Belcourt Holdings. He named a shell corporation like he was naming a ghost. Arthur asked me to copy everything once he suspected financial siphoning. He believed someone in the family was moving money out of the company, routing it offshore. Belcourt, I repeated. The name tasted like iron. Buena Park has good laws for people who like hiding money, Oliver said dryly. Your ticket wasn't exile. It was direction. I thought of Victor's smirk, my mother's weak smile, of the checks fanned out like blessings misdelivered. What am I supposed to do with this? I whispered. Oliver shrugged, eyes kind. Whatever you're best at. Arthur said you're the only one who could tell the story right. I spent the next week combing the ledger, breathing numbers, letting them resolve into shapes. I traced Belcourt Holdings through nominal directors, post office boxes, and subsidiary names that sounded like perfumes. Each time I found a thread, it led to another. Buena Park's marina glittered outside my window, but I lived in spreadsheets and highlighters. I called Ms. Hart twice. She didn't return my calls. On the 8th day, I called my oldest friend Nora, who lived in London and could find anyone or anything given a laptop and a pot of coffee. I need a map of Belcourt's board and all known associates, I told her. Especially anything tied to Whitlow Maritime. Wow, hello to you too, she said, then softened. You okay? No, I said. But I think my grandfather left me a fuse. I just don't know what it detonates. Send me what you have, she said. I'll work quietly. By night, I walked the harbor and talked to ghosts. By day, I learned the smell of printer toner intimately and the way fear creeps even when you feel brave. I kept the ledger in a backpack that never left my side. Twice I thought I was being followed, a man with a navy cap. Once a black car idled too long outside my hotel. On the 10th day, Nora called. I have something ugly. Hit me. Belcourt is a shell, but its beneficial owner traces back to a trust created in the Caymans, one that lists Victor Whitlow as a controlling trustee. But here's the twist, Luna. There's a second trust set to activate contingent on a trigger. Whitlow estate contested by blood heir with documentary cause. The beneficiary? Wren Foundation. Ever heard of it? Wren? I whispered. That was my grandfather's nickname for me when I was little, because I loved climbing onto the boathouse rafters to sing to the swallows. No, then this is a message, Nora said. You challenge the will with evidence of fraud, the second trust activates and redirects assets to Wren Foundation. What is the Wren Foundation? Not sure yet, she said. But I've got a registered address for a Buena Park entity with a similar name, Wren Mariner on Quai Antoine. Guess who signed the original filing? Who? Arthur Whitlow. And a second signature, Evelyn Whitlow. I froze. My mother? Yes, Nora said. Your mother. 4 years ago, the world tilted. My mother, who'd told me to travel. My mother who couldn't meet my eyes at the will reading. My mother, complicit or afraid. I thanked Nora and sat on the edge of the bed with my head in my hands until the room stopped spinning. Then I went to find Wren Mariner. The office was small and spare, with a receptionist who spoke careful English and made me tea. We handle marine conservation grants, she explained. We work with charities in port cities, clean water, apprenticeships for dock workers' children, scholarships. She handed me a pamphlet. My grandfather's signature was printed at the bottom of the founding letterhead. Is Evelyn Whitlow involved? I asked. The receptionist nodded. She serves as co-director, but she hasn't visited in almost a year. I felt a tremor beneath my ribs, the shape of a truth trying to surface. Is there a safe deposit here? I asked, on a hunch so thin it barely had bones. She tilted her head, then nodded slowly. There is. For documents only. I showed her my ID. She made a call. 10 minutes later, I was in a little room with a metal drawer and a paper form with my name typed on it, dated 2 years earlier. I opened the drawer with the brass key Oliver had given me. Inside was a letter addressed to Luna and a small velvet pouch. I unfolded the letter with hands that didn't feel like mine. My Wren, if you're reading this, it means I failed to stop something I should have stopped. You were always the bravest of us, brave enough to be kind. I created Wren Mariner to hold what matters if the company and the family forgot who we are. If Victor has taken the path I feared, he will use you as a scapegoat, because liars always try to exile truth. The pouch contains a key to the boathouse at home. There is a false floorboard beneath the second workbench. You'll find the original ledgers, notarized, and the power of attorney I signed, transferring control of my personal shares to you upon the discovery of fraud. I couldn't put this in the will. Victor would have found it. I left you a ticket because the truth lived offshore. Forgive your mother for what she couldn't fight. Help her remember. Do not try to win their love. Use the law, then tell the story. I read the letter twice. Then I cried. Not because I was sad, because something heavy inside me finally unclenched. In the pouch, a rusted key. The boathouse, home. I booked a flight that night. Back in our coastal town, duller now after. Bana Park's chromed glitter, I stood outside the old boathouse where my grandfather taught me how to read the tides. The gulls wheeled. The air smelled like rope and memories. I unlocked the door. Dust motes rose in the light. The second workbench was exactly where it always had been. I pried up a floorboard with a crowbar and reached into the cool dark. My fingers closed on hard leather. A box. Inside, 3 ledgers with ink so dark it might have been written yesterday, and a sealed legal envelope. I cracked the seal with my thumbnail. The power of attorney named me clearly. Luna Whitlow. Successor entrusted with protective action upon discovery of malfeasance. Witnessed, notarized by Graham Pierce, our old notary. There were also USB drives with scanned copies of checks and a photograph I wasn't ready for. My mother, tears on her cheeks, handing my grandfather a folder. On the back, E brought me Victor's proposal. She asked me to stop it. I tried. My heart tore. My mother had tried. And then she'd lost. As I stood to leave, a shadow filled the doorway. I knew you'd come here. I turned. Victor. He'd always been tall. Now he seemed to fill the boathouse like smoke. Nice to see you too, Uncle, I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. He glanced at the pried-up floorboard, then at the box in my hands. Nostalgia doesn't suit you, he sneered. Listen, Luna, you're not cut out for this. You'll end up hurting yourself. Hand it over, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. A ticket to somewhere even farther? I said. Maybe this time the moon? His smile vanished. You always were dramatic. And you were always careless with your lies. I stepped closer. I have copies, Victor. Everything you've moved through Belcourt. Every cent you smuggled from the people who worked for us, the ones you called replaceable. He glanced past me, eyes narrowing. You think anyone will believe you? I don't need them to believe me, I said. I need them to read. I walked past him, box in my arms, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt tall. The next 3 weeks were a storm. I contacted Ms. Hart again, this time sending her a scanned page from the ledger and the power of attorney. She called back within the hour, voice crisp, the old kindness back. Bring everything to my office. We'll file an injunction first thing. I met Graham Pierce, the notary, who confirmed the documents. I hired a forensic accountant named Daniel Brooks, who spoke like a metronome and moved like a scalpel. We reviewed transfers, flagged fake invoices, charted the flow of funds into Belcourt, and then into personal ventures hiding behind Madeline's consulting firm. Daniel didn't smile often, but when he did, it scared me in a good way. Then I did what my grandfather asked. I told the story. I wrote a detailed report, part narrative, part ledger, that could be read by a judge or by a dock worker on a lunch break. I included photographs, signatures, the exact dates. I kept my voice cool, almost clinical. And then I wrote a version for people, the ones who knew my grandfather's name because he'd once fixed their engine or paid their medical bill. I recorded a video sitting on the boathouse steps, no makeup, just truth, and said, "This is what happened. This is what we're doing to fix it." It spread. The union shared it. So did the local paper. Then a national outlet called, Victor tried to issue a statement about misunderstandings. Madeline posted a photograph of herself on a yacht with the caption, "Manifest wealth." It did not play well. We filed a petition to challenge the will on grounds of fraud and coercion, citing the Blood Air documentary cause that triggered the Wren contingency. Ms. Hart moved like a chess master, precise and merciless. We got a court date for an emergency hearing. The night before the hearing, my mother knocked on my door. She was thinner than I remembered, her eyes ringed with the kind of tired that can't be slept away. "Come in," I said. She stood in my kitchen like a stranger. "I should have told you," she said softly. "I signed the founding papers for Wren Mariner with your grandfather because I thought we could wall off something good. Then Victor threatened to cut your medical insurance if I interfered again. You were in grad school, your asthma was bad, and She closed her eyes. "I was a coward. You were a mother," I said. "And he used that against you." Tears slipped down her face. "He told me if I went against him, he'd make you disappear from the company like you never existed. I told myself it was better to keep you out of it, that he'd just be done." I stepped closer and took her hand. "We're not done." "Not anymore." She nodded, something like relief loosening her mouth. "I'll testify," she whispered. "Whatever you need." "Okay," I said. "We go together." The courtroom smelled like polish and old arguments. Victor arrived with an expensive-looking lawyer and the smile of a man who hadn't imagined consequences. Madeline took a seat behind him, flipping through her phone. My mother and I sat side by side. Ms. Hart arranged our exhibits, the ledgers, the power of attorney, the USB drives. Daniel, the accountant, prepared charts showing the money's path. When the judge asked why we believed the will didn't reflect Mr. Whitlow's true wishes, I stood. My legs trembled, but my voice didn't. "My grandfather told me to go where the truth is," I said. "He couldn't put his trust in the will because he knew it would be attacked. So he put it in me." We submitted the Wren Mariner filings, the contingent trusts trigger clause, the notarized documents. We played an audio message we'd recovered from my grandfather's old voice recorder. Graham had saved it, dated 3 months before his death. "If Victor has moved the money, then he's moved the line. I won't let him erase the people who got us here. If Luna fights, give her what she needs. She'll do it clean." Victor's lawyer objected on grounds of posthumous editorializing. The judge overruled him. Madeline stopped scrolling. When Daniel explained the siphoning in numbers that even a child could follow, Victor's face went pink, then gray. When my mother described the night Victor threatened her, in a voice smaller than I'd ever known, the room went silent, the kind of silence that makes guilt loud. The judge recessed for 30 minutes. In the hallway, Victor approached me, quiet now. "You could have asked for something reasonable," he said, like we were haggling over a watch. I stared at him. "I am," he blinked. "What do you want, Luna?" "Everything you took," I said. "And an apology to every person you called replaceable." He laughed a little because he didn't understand yet that sometimes the story is stronger than the swagger. We went back in. The judge granted an injunction freezing the dubious assets, ordered an independent audit of Whitlow Maritime, and recognized the Wren contingency, transferring temporary control of my grandfather's personal shares to me pending final adjudication. The courtroom exhaled. Ms. Hart squeezed my shoulder. My mother closed her eyes. After I walked to the boathouse alone, sat on the steps where I'd recorded the video, and breathed. The harbor looked ordinary again, like a working thing, not a stage. My phone buzzed. "Nora. You did it, Wren." I didn't respond right away. I watched a kid ride past on a rusted bike and a gull steal a chip from a paper cone. Victory felt less like fireworks and more like weight shifting off old beams. There was more to do. There's always more. But the ship was turning. Build up to revenge had been spreadsheets and late nights and people who stood up when they didn't have to. But revenge itself, I realized, wasn't the point. Restoration was. We established the Wren Foundation publicly, turning Wren Mariner into a broader initiative, scholarships for port workers' families, a fund for injured deckhands, a small museum for maritime history in a wing of the boathouse. We reinstated pensions Victor had tried to restructure. We sent thank you letters to employees my grandfather had once helped and asked for their stories. We built something loud enough to drown out the old lies. As for Victor and Madeline, the audit painted what we already knew in indelible lines. Charges followed: wire fraud, embezzlement, the graceless spiral of people who believed they'd never be caught. They pled to lesser counts, because money is a strange coward. The court confirmed the restructuring of the will, validating the contingent trust. Much of what they'd taken returned to company coffers and to community funds. On the day we announced the new apprenticeship program, I stood on a makeshift stage at the marina. The wind pulled at my hair. Oliver leaned against a post, smiling, hands in pockets. My mother, eyes bright, sat in the front row next to Graham and Daniel and Ms. Hart, who had become more than our lawyer. She'd become our ally. I stepped to the microphone. I was given a ticket as if it were an exile, I said, but it was a compass. It pointed me to the truth, and to all of you. Later, after the speeches and the applause, I walked alone along the dock. The water lapped. A small wren, or maybe it was just a brown bird with the spirit of one, hopped along the rail. I laughed. I got your letter, I said to the air. I used the law. I told the story. My phone vibrated with a new message. 2 words from an unknown number. Thank you. No caller ID. I stared at it, then tucked the phone away. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Either way, I didn't need confirmation. I knew what we'd done. A month later, I went back to Buena Park. Not to run or to chase ghosts, but to close a circle. I brought a copy of the ledger report and a framed photo of my grandfather at 30, grinning with oil on his hands. Oliver met me at the dock. Thought you'd come back, he said. The sea does that. We sat on the edge of the quay with our feet dangling, eating gelato like kids. He was right about you, I told Oliver. You kept the flame lit. Oliver shrugged. He was stubborn. So are you. Stubborn people save things. I left the photo by the waterline for a moment, just long enough for it to catch the light, then tucked it safely back into my bag. The harbor glittered, but it didn't look like a stage anymore. It looked like work. I've always liked work. On my last evening there, I recorded one more video, this time for my channel, the one where I tell true stories about power and family and grit. I started it the way my grandfather would have liked, simple and honest. Hi, I'm Luna. I got exiled to Buena Park with nothing but a ticket and a note. This is how the ticket became a map, and how the map became home. I talked about betrayal, and how it can feel like being dropped into cold water. I talked about fear, which is actually a good compass if you learn to listen to what it's pointing away from. I talked about anger, which can burn you hollow if you don't aim it at something useful. And I talked about love, the ordinary. Worker's hands, ledger ink kind of love that builds things and keeps them upright. I ended with the boathouse steps behind me, the light fading gold. If you've ever been told you're not built for the fight, I said, maybe you're built to win it clean. I clicked upload. Resolution wasn't a gavel's thud. It was 1,000 small choices. Paying back what was owed, forgiving what could be forgiven without forgetting, keeping the boathouse lights on. My mother started volunteering at the foundation. We talk now in a language we're still learning, made of apologies and coffee and rebuilding. Victor will have time to think about scarcity in a way he never did, and Madeline is discovering the difference between attention and respect. As for me, I am the truth keeper again, not because I won, but because I refused to lie. Sometimes I still dream of that afternoon in the lawyer's office, the thick checks, the thin envelope, the shame in my throat. In the dream, I open the envelope, and there's only air. Then I wake and laugh, because air was all I ever needed. Space to breathe, to think, to fight. When the wind comes up over the marina, it sounds like pages turning. I like to imagine it's my grandfather reading. I like to imagine he underlines the parts where I stumble and writes in the margin, good. Keep going. I will. If you felt this story, if you've ever been underestimated, exiled, or told to stay quiet, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs a compass. Tell me in the comments, what's the ticket in your life that turned into a map? Your story might be the truth someone else is waiting to hear.